The text message that changed everything came while I was elbow deep in a busted furnace at the Henderson place. "Family trip this weekend. Dad's cabin. You'll love it." My wife Sabrina's enthusiasm practically dripped through the screen like antifreeze from a cracked radiator. Before we dive deeper into this story, I have one small request. Please subscribe, drop a like, comment, and hit that hype button to boost this channel so more people can discover these incredible Reddit stories. I'm Tom Heywood, 38 years old, and I fix heating systems for a living. It's honest work that keeps people warm when the world gets cold. Too bad I couldn't say the same about my marriage. Sabrina's family treated me like a necessary evil, the blue-collar husband who somehow tricked their precious daughter into settling. Her father, Richard Blackwood, made his fortune in commercial real estate and never let anyone forget it. The man wore his wealth like cologne, heavy and obvious. "Pete," I called to my business partner, who was wrestling with a water heater in the basement. "Cancel my weekend plans. Apparently I'm going camping with the in-laws." Pete's laugh echoed up the stairs. "Better you than me, brother. Those people would freeze hell over just to charge admission." Friday evening arrived with the subtlety of a sledgehammer. Sabrina packed enough luggage for a month-long expedition while I threw some clothes in an old duffel bag. The difference between us had never been more obvious. "You could try to look excited," she said, adjusting her makeup in the hallway mirror. "Dad really wants to bond with you. Your father wants to bond with me, like a shark wants to bond with a seal." She rolled her eyes. "You're being dramatic. He's making an effort." The effort included Richard's brand new Range Rover parked in our driveway, engine running, classical music drifting from the open windows. Sabrina's brother Jake sat in the passenger seat, scrolling through his phone with the intensity of a day trader. Richard stepped out wearing outdoor gear that probably cost more than my monthly mortgage payment. "Tom, ready for some real adventure?" "Define real," I said, loading my bag into the back. 3 days at the family cabin. No cell service, no distractions. Just men being men in the wilderness. Sabrina kissed my cheek. "I'll miss you guys. Girls' weekend with Mom will be so boring compared to your camping trip." Something in her tone made me look twice, but she was already heading back to the house. Women's intuition works both ways. Sometimes husbands get feelings too. The drive to Richard's cabin took 4 hours through increasingly remote Pennsylvania countryside. Jake provided commentary on everything from gas prices to his latest cryptocurrency investments, while Richard pontificated about the good old days when men solved problems with handshakes and hard work. "Take Tom here," Richard said, catching my eye in the rearview mirror. "Honest tradesman. Gets his hands dirty. That's admirable." The condescension was thicker than motor oil, but I smiled and nodded. "Pick your battles," my father always said. "Save your energy for the wars that matter." The cabin sat on 50 acres of pristine woodland, complete with a private lake and enough amenities to shame most hotels. This wasn't camping. It was glamping for people who owned actual glamps. "Impressive place," I admitted, genuinely awed despite myself. "Built it myself," Richard said with obvious pride. "Well, supervised the construction. Same thing." We spent Friday evening around a fire pit, drinking expensive whiskey and listening to Richard's war stories from the business world. Jake contributed occasional grunts of agreement while playing games on his phone. The cell service was spotty but functional, which seemed to disappoint Richard. "Part of the experience is disconnecting," he grumbled. "Your generation doesn't understand the value of being unreachable." Saturday morning brought the first real test. Richard announced we'd be hiking to the far end of the property to check on some boundary markers. The trail was challenging, winding through dense forest and over rocky terrain that would humble a mountain goat. "City living makes you soft," Richard observed as Jake struggled to keep pace. "Tom's probably used to this kind of physical challenge." Actually, I spent most of my time in basements and crawl spaces, but I wasn't about to correct him. The hike took 3 hours, and by the end, Jake looked ready to call for helicopter evacuation. "Good workout," I said, offering him my water bottle. Nothing like fresh air to clear the head. Richard beamed like I'd just validated his entire worldview. Exactly. This is what men need. Challenge, adversity, character building. Saturday evening's entertainment involved fishing from the cabin's private dock. Richard had enough equipment to stock a sporting goods store, all top-of-the-line gear that had probably seen more display cases than actual fish. The secret is patience, he explained, casting his line with practiced precision. Most people want instant gratification. Real success takes time. I caught 3 bass to his 0, which seemed to irritate him more than he wanted to admit. Jake didn't catch anything either, but he was too busy taking selfies to notice. Beginner's luck, Richard muttered, as I pulled in another keeper. Maybe. Or maybe the fish don't care how much your rod costs. The comment hung in the air like smoke from a backfiring engine. Jake looked up from his phone, sensing tension. Richard's jaw tightened, but he forced a smile. You might be right about that. Sunday morning arrived with the kind of crisp autumn air that makes you grateful to be alive. I woke early, made coffee, and sat on the cabin's deck watching the lake reflect the sunrise. For a moment, I almost forgot I was surrounded by people who barely tolerated my existence. Richard emerged from his bedroom looking like he'd stepped off a magazine cover, even in pajamas. The man probably had a morning routine that required a personal assistant. Beautiful morning, he said, pouring himself coffee from the pot I'd made. Best part of the day, I agreed. Peaceful. Shame it has to end. Back to the real world tomorrow. Something in his tone made me glance over. He was smiling, but it was the kind of smile that made small animals run for cover. Jake stumbled out an hour later, hair pointing in 12 different directions, squinting at the sunlight like it owed him money. What time is it? He groaned. Time to pack up, Richard announced. We should hit the road by 10, beat the traffic. The next 2 hours passed in a blur of loading gear and cleaning the cabin. Richard insisted on leaving the place spotless, which I respected. Say what you want about the man, he took care of his property. By 10:15, we were loaded and ready. Richard locked up the cabin while Jake claimed shotgun and immediately plugged in his phone charger. Gas station first, Richard announced. Top off the tank and grab some snacks for the road. The Sunoco station sat at the intersection of 2 rural highways, the kind of place that sold more lottery tickets than gasoline. Richard pulled up to the pump while I went inside to use the restroom and grab some coffee for the ride home. The coffee was terrible, but it was hot and caffeinated, which covered the basic requirements. I also grabbed a bag of mixed nuts and some beef jerky, figuring I might get hungry before we reached civilization. The transaction took maybe 5 minutes. I chatted with the elderly clerk about the weather and the local high school football team's chances this season. Normal small talk between strangers who'd never see each other again. When I walked outside, the parking space where Richard's Range Rover had been was empty. I stood there for a moment, bag of snacks in one hand, terrible coffee in the other, staring at the empty asphalt like it might reveal some hidden truth about the universe. My phone buzzed with an incoming text message. Sabrina. LOL Dad's idea. Consider it a character building exercise. Find your own way home. Then another from Jake. Don't take it personally, bro. Just a prank. You'll laugh about this later. And finally, Richard himself. Real men figure it out. See you back in town, eventually. I read the messages twice, then looked around the gas station parking lot. A few 18-wheelers, a couple of beat-up pickup trucks, and one very confused HVAC contractor standing in the middle of nowhere with a bag of beef jerky and a growing sense of disbelief. The rational part of my brain understood what had happened. They'd planned this. The whole weekend had been set up for this moment. Strand Tom at a gas station 4 hours from home and see how he handles it. A test of character, a prank, a bonding experience. The irrational part of my brain was calculating how much it would cost to hire someone to dump a truckload of concrete mix in Richard's swimming pool. I walked back into the gas station, where the elderly clerk was reading a newspaper behind bulletproof glass. "Excuse me," I said, "is there a car rental place around here?" He looked up, studied my face, and shook his head. "Nearest Enterprise is about 40 miles south. You having car trouble?" "Something like that." "Well, there's a taxi service in town, Jimmy's Cab. He might run you down to the rental place for $50. I called Jimmy's Cab. Jimmy himself answered on the third ring, sounding like he'd been smoking cigarettes since the Carter administration. "Yeah, I can take you to the Enterprise. Gonna cost you $60, though. Gas prices, you know." "Fine." "How long?" 20 minutes. While I waited, I called Pete. "How's the family bonding going?" he asked. "They left me at a gas station." Silence on the other end. Then, "Come again?" Richard, Jake, and apparently my wife thought it would be funny to strand me at a Sunoco station in the middle of Pennsylvania. Character building exercise. "You're kidding." I wish I was. Pete's vocabulary turned colorful for about 30 seconds. When he finished, he said, "What do you need?" "Nothing right now. I'm getting a rental car and driving home. Just wanted someone to know where I was in case I disappear." "Tom, these people are insane. You know that, right?" "I'm starting to figure that out." Jimmy arrived in a Crown Victoria that had seen better decades. The suspension was shot, the muffler had given up trying, and the air freshener was fighting a losing battle against the smell of stale cigarettes and regret. "You the guy needs a ride to Enterprise?" Jimmy asked. "That's me." "Hop in. You look like you've had a day." The ride to the rental car place gave me 40 minutes to think, which was probably 39 minutes too many. By the time we pulled into the Enterprise parking lot, I'd progressed through the traditional stages of grief and landed somewhere between acceptance and plotting elaborate revenge. The rental process took another hour. The only available vehicle was a Chevy Malibu with Pennsylvania plates and the lingering scent of the previous renter's fast food choices. But it ran, had air conditioning, and would get me home. I programmed my address into the GPS and started driving. 4 hours of interstate highway stretched ahead, 4 hours to decide how I felt about being married to someone who thought abandoning me in rural Pennsylvania was hilarious. My phone rang as I merged onto I-80. Sabrina's name appeared on the dashboard display. "Hey, honey," she said when I answered. "How's your adventure going?" "Well, I'm driving a rental car home from the middle of nowhere, so it's been educational." "Oh, come on. Don't be mad. Dad just wanted to see if you could handle a little adversity. Your father wanted to see if I could handle being abandoned by my own family. Mission accomplished." "You're being dramatic. It's just a prank." "Sabrina, pranks are supposed to be funny for everyone involved. This is just cruel." She sighed, the way she did when I failed to appreciate her family's unique sense of humor. "Look, we're all meeting for dinner tonight at Mom and Dad's. You can tell us all about your big adventure." "I don't think so." "What do you mean?" "I mean, I don't think I'll be joining you for dinner, or anything else involving your family, for a while." The line went quiet for a moment. Then, "Tom, you're overreacting." "Am I? Let me ask you something. Did you know about this beforehand?" Another pause. Longer this time. "Sabrina, did you know they were going to leave me at that gas station?" "It wasn't supposed to be a big deal. Dad said it would be character building." "So yes, you knew." "Tom." I hung up and turned off the phone. The house felt different when I walked through the front door Sunday evening. Same furniture, same pictures on the walls, same coffee mug I'd left in the sink Friday morning. But something fundamental had shifted, like the emotional equivalent of a foundation settling. Sabrina's car wasn't in the driveway, which meant she was still at her parents' house, probably trying to explain why her husband was being so unreasonable about a harmless family prank. I ordered Chinese takeout and ate it while watching a baseball game on television. The normalcy felt surreal after the weekend's events. 24 hours ago, I'd been trying to impress my father-in-law with my outdoorsman skills. Now, I was wondering if my marriage was worth salvaging. My phone had been buzzing with messages since I turned it back on, but I ignored them all. Whatever my wife and her family had to say could wait until I'd processed the full scope of their betrayal. Sabrina came home around 10 o'clock, letting herself in quietly, like she was sneaking into a house she wasn't supposed to be in. "Tom?" she called. "Are you awake?" "In the living room." She appeared in the doorway, wearing the apologetic expression she usually reserved for minor household infractions like forgetting to record my favorite TV show. "How was the drive home?" she asked. "Long, expensive, enlightening." She sat down on the opposite end of the couch, maintaining careful distance. "Dad feels bad about how everything went down." "Does he really? Or does he feel bad that his prank didn't have the desired effect? He wanted to test you, see what you were made of." "And what's the verdict? Did I pass?" Sabrina twisted her wedding ring, a nervous habit she'd developed over the past few years. "You handled it well, got yourself home safely, proved you could deal with adversity." "Sabrina, I've been dealing with adversity my whole life. I grew up in a house where the heat got shut off if my dad couldn't make the utility payment. I've worked since I was 14 years old. I don't need your father's tests to prove what I'm made of." "I know that. But Dad comes from a different world. He needed to see it for himself." "And you? What did you need to see?" She looked away, studying the family photos on the mantel like she'd never seen them before. "I needed to know you wouldn't just give up, that you'd fight to get home to me." The honesty in her voice caught me off guard. For a moment, I saw the woman I'd fallen in love with 8 years ago, before her family's money and expectations had complicated everything between us. "I did get home," I said quietly, "but not because of some test, because this is my home, because you're my wife, because when people abandon you, you don't abandon yourself." She nodded, tears threatening at the corners of her eyes. "I'm sorry. It seemed harmless when Dad explained it. Just a little adventure. I didn't think about how it would feel to be the one left behind." "That's the problem, Sabrina. You didn't think. None of you thought about how your actions would affect me. I wasn't a person to you in that moment. I was just the subject of an experiment." We sat in silence for several minutes, both of us processing the weight of what had happened and what it meant for our relationship. "What happens now?" she asked finally. "I don't know. I need some time to figure out how I feel about being married to someone who thinks abandoning me is acceptable under any circumstances." "It was just a prank, Tom." "No, Sabrina, it wasn't. Pranks are putting plastic wrap over the toilet seat or hiding someone's car keys. What your family did was emotional abuse disguised as humor." She started to argue, then stopped herself. Maybe she was finally beginning to understand the difference. "I'll talk to Dad. Make sure he knows this kind of thing can't happen again." "Don't bother. I won't be spending any more time with your father, or your brother, or any family events where they're present." "You can't just cut them out of our lives." "I can cut them out of my life. What you do is up to you." The next morning, I went to work early and stayed late, losing myself in the familiar rhythms of diagnosing and repairing broken heating systems. There's something therapeutic about fixing things that are actually fixable. Pete could tell something was wrong, but he didn't push for details. We'd been partners long enough to recognize when the other needed space to work through personal problems. Around noon, my phone started ringing with calls from numbers I didn't recognize. I let them go to voicemail, figuring they were probably sales calls or wrong numbers. The first voicemail was from my friend Mike Chen, who worked construction and occasionally grabbed beers with me and Pete after work. "Hey Tom, heard about what happened this weekend. That's messed up, man. Just wanted you to know, I'm thinking about you." The second was from Dave Martinez, another guy from our regular poker game. "Tom, it's Dave. Sabrina called my wife, told her what happened. Dude, that's not cool what they did to you. Call me if you need anything." By the end of the day, I had 8 similar messages from friends and acquaintances. Apparently, Sabrina had been making calls, trying to drum up support for her family's position, or maybe just needing to talk to someone about the situation. What surprised me was how universally my friends condemned what had happened. Not one person thought the gas station abandonment was funny or acceptable. Several used words I wouldn't repeat in polite company to describe Richard's character. When I got home, Sabrina was in the kitchen making dinner, something she rarely did on weekdays. "Smells good," I said, genuinely meaning it. "Pot roast, your favorite." She was trying. I had to give her credit for that. But cooking dinner wasn't going to erase what had happened or address the fundamental problem in our relationship. "I've been getting calls all day," I said. "Apparently you've been talking to people about this weekend?" She looked embarrassed. I needed someone to talk to. I called a few of the wives, just to get their perspective. And what was their perspective? They mostly agreed with you. Said what Dad did was wrong. What did you expect them to say? I don't know. Maybe that it wasn't as bad as you were making it out to be. That family pranks are normal. Sabrina, normal families don't abandon each other in the middle of nowhere. Normal families don't use cruelty as a bonding exercise. She served the pot roast in silence, both of us lost in our own thoughts. The food was actually quite good, which somehow made the whole situation more depressing. "I talked to Dad today," she said finally. "How did that go?" "He's not apologizing. Says you proved his point by getting home safely. Claims the whole thing was a success." I put down my fork and looked at her across the table. "And what do you think?" "I think my husband and my father both have valid points, and I'm caught in the middle trying to keep everyone happy." "You can't keep everyone happy, Sabrina. Sometimes you have to choose sides." "Why should I have to choose? Why can't you just forgive and move on?" "Because forgiveness without acknowledgement of wrongdoing isn't forgiveness. It's enabling. Your father doesn't think he did anything wrong, which means he'll do it again. Maybe not to me, but to someone." The conversation continued in circles for another hour, both of us retreating to familiar positions. Sabrina wanted peace and harmony. I wanted accountability and respect. Neither of us was willing to compromise our core principles. That night, I slept in the guest bedroom for the first time in our marriage. The breaking point came 3 weeks later at Dave Martinez's birthday party. Sabrina and I had been coexisting in a state of cold politeness, both of us waiting for the other to blink first in our standoff over her family's behavior. Dave's backyard was full of our usual crowd, couples from the neighborhood, guys from work, friends from high school who'd managed to stay in touch despite the passage of time and the demands of adult life. Under normal circumstances, it would have been exactly the kind of evening I enjoyed. But these weren't normal circumstances. I was standing by the grill, talking shop with Pete and a couple of other contractors, when I noticed Sabrina deep in conversation with Jennifer Chen and Lisa Martinez near the patio table. Their body language suggested serious discussion rather than casual party chat. "You doing okay?" Pete asked quietly. "You seem distracted." "Just thinking about some things." "The gas station thing?" Word had gotten around, despite my efforts to keep the situation private. In a community like ours, news traveled fast, especially when it involved someone acting as badly as Richard had. "Among other things." Pete nodded toward where Sabrina was talking with the other wives. "She's been working the room pretty hard tonight, talking to everyone about what happened." "What's she saying?" "From what I can gather, she's trying to convince people that you're overreacting, that it was just a harmless prank that got blown out of proportion." I felt my jaw tighten. We'd agreed to keep our marital problems private while we worked through them. Apparently, that agreement only applied to me. "Excuse me for a minute," I said, setting down my beer and walking toward the patio table. As I approached, I caught the tail end of Sabrina's conversation with Jennifer. "Just can't understand why he's being so stubborn about this. It's not like they left him in the desert or something. There was a gas station right there." "Sabrina," I said, my voice carrying more edge than I'd intended. She looked up, startled. The other women suddenly found their drinks very interesting. "Can I talk to you privately for a moment?" "We're just having a conversation, Tom. About our private business, with people who don't need to be involved." Jennifer and Lisa exchanged glances and excused themselves, leaving Sabrina and me alone at the patio table. The party continued around us, but I could feel eyes watching our interaction. "You're embarrassing me," Sabrina hissed. "I'm embarrassing you? You've spent the evening trying to turn our friends against me, and I'm the one being embarrassing." "I'm not trying to turn anyone against you. I'm trying to help them understand your perspective. By minimizing what happened and making me sound unreasonable. By explaining that sometimes families do things that seem harsh but come from a place of love." "Love?" I couldn't keep the incredulity out of my voice. "Sabrina, your father abandoned me at a gas station 4 hours from home. That's not love. That's cruelty. He was testing you." "Stop saying that." The words came out louder than I'd intended, causing several nearby conversations to pause. "Stop making excuses for inexcusable behavior. Your father is a bully, your brother is a coward, and you're an enabler." Sabrina's face went white, then red. "How dare you talk about my family like that? How dare your family treat me like that?" We were attracting more attention now. Dave Martinez was moving in our direction, probably preparing to play peacemaker at his own birthday party. "Maybe we should take this home," Sabrina said through gritted teeth. "Maybe we should. Or maybe we should finally have this conversation in front of people who can provide some objective perspective." "Tom, man, everything okay over here?" Dave had arrived, wearing the expression of someone who really didn't want to deal with marital drama at his birthday party. "Everything's fine, Dave. Sabrina and I were just discussing her family's idea of appropriate behavior." "It's not fine," Sabrina snapped. "Tom is being completely unreasonable about a harmless family tradition." "Harmless." The word came from Mike Chen, who'd been standing close enough to overhear. "Sabrina, they left him stranded. That's not harmless." "It was a test of character," Sabrina replied, her voice rising. "Something men used to understand before everyone became so sensitive." A small crowd was gathering now, drawn by the obvious tension and raised voices. I could see Pete shaking his head in disgust, Lisa Martinez looking uncomfortable, and several other friends watching the drama unfold with morbid fascination. "You want to talk about character?" I said, my own voice getting louder. "Let's talk about the character it takes to abandon someone you're supposed to care about. Let's talk about the character it takes to defend that behavior. Let's talk about the character it takes to stand by your husband when his own family treats him like garbage." "My family has been nothing but welcoming to you," Sabrina shot back. "They included you in family traditions, invited you to the cabin, tried to help you become a better man. By leaving me at a gas station. By giving you a chance to prove yourself." The party had essentially stopped now. Dave's birthday celebration had become the Tom and Sabrina show, and neither of us seemed capable of stepping back from the brink. "Prove myself to whom?" I demanded. "To your father, who's never worked a day of honest labor in his life? To your brother, who can't change a tire without calling AAA? To you, who thinks cruelty is character building?" "At least my family has standards," Sabrina replied, her voice dripping with venom. "At least they don't settle for mediocrity and make excuses for failure." The words hit like a physical blow. In front of our friends, neighbors, and colleagues, my wife had just called me a mediocre failure. The woman I'd loved for 8 years, supported through graduate school, and built a life with had reduced me to nothing more than a disappointment her family had to tolerate. The backyard went completely silent. Even the music seemed to pause in shock. I looked around at the faces surrounding us, friends who'd known me for years, people who'd seen me work 60-hour weeks to build a successful business, neighbors who'd watched me help elderly Mrs. Patterson with her yard work every weekend, colleagues who'd trusted me with their most challenging projects. "Well," I said quietly, my voice carrying clearly in the sudden silence, "I guess we know where everyone stands." I turned and walked toward the gate leading to the front yard, leaving Sabrina standing alone by the patio table. Behind me, I could hear the murmur of shocked conversation beginning to resume. Pete caught up with me in the driveway. "Tom, wait up." "I'm done, Pete. I'm done with all of it. She didn't mean what she said. She's just upset and trying to defend her family." "Yes, she did mean it. That's the problem. She meant every word." I got in my truck and drove home, leaving Sabrina to find her own way back from the party where she'd just destroyed our marriage in front of everyone we knew. The next morning, I woke up alone in the guest bedroom to the sound of Sabrina packing suitcases in our bedroom. She was moving with the efficient purpose of someone who'd made a decision and wanted to execute it quickly before doubt could creep in. I made coffee and sat at the kitchen table, waiting. Whatever conversation was coming, I wanted to be fully awake for it. She appeared 20 minutes later, dressed for travel, pulling 2 large suitcases behind her. "I'm going to stay with my parents for a while," she announced without preamble. "Probably for the best. I can't believe you humiliated me like that in front of our friends." I looked up from my coffee, studying her face. She was serious. In her mind, I was the villain in this story. "Sabrina, you called me a mediocre failure in front of everyone we know, but I'm the one who humiliated you? You forced me into that situation. You made a scene about something that should have stayed private. You made it public when you spent 3 weeks trying to convince our friends that I was overreacting. I just finally defended myself." She shook her head, the gesture conveying years of accumulated frustration. "This is exactly what Dad was talking about. You don't take responsibility for anything. It's always someone else's fault. Your father was talking about me before the gas station incident?" The question caught her off guard. For a moment, her carefully constructed narrative faltered. He was concerned about your attitude, your resentment toward our family. My resentment toward your family started when your family began treating me like an unwelcome guest at my own life. But you're right about one thing. I should take responsibility. I should have stood up to them years ago instead of trying to keep the peace. Sabrina's phone buzzed with an incoming text. She glanced at it, and I caught a glimpse of her father's name on the screen. "Dad's outside," she said. "He's driving me home." "Of course he is." She paused at the front door, one hand on the handle, looking back at me with something that might have been regret. "I love you, Tom, but I can't choose between you and my family." "You already did choose, Sabrina. You chose them the moment you decided their cruelty was acceptable. You chose them when you defended the indefensible. You chose them when you called me a failure in front of our friends. Maybe we just need some time apart to think about things. Maybe we do." She left without saying goodbye, her suitcases bumping against the doorframe as she maneuvered them outside. Through the front window, I watched Richard load her bags into his Range Rover with the satisfied expression of a man whose plan had worked perfectly. He caught sight of me watching and raised his hand in a mocking wave before getting behind the wheel and driving away with my wife. I spent the rest of the morning calling in sick to work and sitting in my empty house, processing the complete collapse of my marriage. By noon, the silence was driving me crazy, so I called Pete. "How are you holding up?" he asked. "I've been better. How bad was it after I left last night?" "Pretty bad. Sabrina tried to rally support, but most people were pretty shocked by what she said to you. Jennifer Chen told her she was out of line. Dave asked her to leave. She got kicked out of the party?" "Not kicked out exactly, but Dave made it clear the evening was over as far as she was concerned." I felt a grim satisfaction at that news. At least our friends could recognize inappropriate behavior when they saw it. "What happens now?" Pete asked. "I honestly don't know. I guess I figure out how to be single again." "You sure that's what you want?" "I'm sure I don't want to be married to someone who thinks I'm a mediocre failure." I'm sure I don't want to spend the rest of my life being tested and judged by people who've never faced real adversity. I'm sure I don't want to be with someone who chooses her family's approval over her husband's dignity." Pete was quiet for a moment, processing my words. "For what it's worth, I think you're making the right choice. Sabrina showed her true colors last night, and they weren't pretty." Over the next few days, I received a steady stream of calls and visits from friends offering support. The general consensus was that Sabrina had crossed a line at the party, and that her family's behavior at the gas station had been inexcusable. Mike Chen stopped by Wednesday evening with a 6-pack of beer and a pizza. "Figured you might not be cooking much for yourself," he said. We ate in comfortable silence, watching a baseball game on television. During the 7th-inning stretch, Mike finally brought up what everyone was thinking. "You know this is going to get messy, right? Divorce, property division, all that legal stuff." "I know. You got a lawyer?" "Not yet. I keep hoping we can work something out without getting attorneys involved." Mike gave me a look that suggested I was being naively optimistic. "Tom, her family has money and connections. You think they're going to play fair in a divorce?" He was right, of course. Richard Blackwood hadn't built his real estate empire by playing fair. If this went to court, he'd use every advantage he had to protect his daughter's interests. "I'll start making calls tomorrow," I said. "Good. And Tom, document everything. Every conversation, every text message, every interaction. You're going to need evidence of their behavior." Thursday morning brought a certified letter from a downtown law firm I'd never heard of. Inside was a formal notice that Sabrina was filing for divorce on grounds of irreconcilable differences, along with a request for temporary spousal support and half of all marital assets. The letter was signed by someone named Patricia Whitmore, Esquire, whose letterhead suggested she specialized in high-asset divorce cases. Richard had wasted no time hiring his daughter the best representation money could buy. I called the first attorney I found in the phone book, who advertised reasonable rates and family law experience. His name was Jim Kowalski, and his office was above a pizza shop in a strip mall 20 minutes from my house. "Mr. Heywood," he said after reviewing Sabrina's filing, "your wife is asking for a lot. Spousal support, half the house, half your business, half your retirement accounts. With the right representation, she might get it." "What kind of representation does she have?" "Patricia Whitmore is one of the most expensive divorce attorneys in the state. She usually represents wives of doctors, executives, politicians, people with serious money." "So I'm outgunned." "Financially, yes. But that doesn't mean we can't fight, especially if we can prove unreasonable behavior on their part." I told him about the gas station incident, the public humiliation at Dave's party, and Richard's obvious manipulation of the situation. Jim took notes and asked detailed questions about dates, witnesses, and documentation. "This is good," he said finally. "Abandonment, even as a prank, shows a pattern of cruel behavior. The public humiliation at the party was witnessed by multiple people. We can build a case that your wife and her family created an impossible situation and then blamed you for the consequences." "What are my chances?" "Better than you might think. Pennsylvania is a no-fault divorce state, but judges still consider behavior when dividing assets. If we can show that your wife's family deliberately undermined your marriage, it might influence the settlement." I left Jim's office feeling cautiously optimistic. For the first time since this whole mess started, I had someone on my side who understood how to fight back. The divorce proceedings dragged on for 6 months, each side maneuvering for advantage, while our attorneys racked up billable hours. Sabrina and I communicated only through lawyers, which somehow made the end of our marriage feel both more final and more surreal. Patricia Whitmore proved to be every bit as formidable as her reputation suggested. She painted me as a resentful, controlling husband who couldn't accept his wife's family's success. According to her narrative, I'd systematically isolated Sabrina from her loved ones and then exploded in rage when they tried to include me in their traditions. Jim Kowalski fought back with witness testimony from the birthday party, documentation of the gas station incident, and character references from friends and customers who'd known me for years. Slowly, we built a counter-narrative of a hard-working man pushed to his breaking point by a family that viewed cruelty as entertainment. The turning point came during Sabrina's deposition, when Jim asked her to explain exactly why she thought abandoning me at a gas station was acceptable behavior. It wasn't abandonment, she insisted. It was a test. My father wanted to see if Tom could handle adversity. Mrs. Heywood, your husband handles adversity every day in his work. He's built a successful business from nothing. He's supported you through graduate school. What kind of adversity did your father think he needed to test? Sabrina's answer revealed more than she probably intended. Tom has always been resentful of our family's success. Dad thought if he could prove himself in a challenging situation, it might help his self-confidence. So your father believed your husband lacked self-confidence? He believed Tom felt inferior and was taking it out on our family. And you agreed with this assessment? Sabrina hesitated, probably realizing she was walking into a trap. I thought Dad might have a point. So you conspired with your father to abandon your husband at a gas station in order to help his self-confidence. We didn't conspire. We just went along with Dad's idea. Without telling your husband. Without his consent. Leaving him stranded 4 hours from home. It wasn't supposed to be a big deal. Jim let that answer hang in the air for a moment before continuing. Mrs. Heywood, at the birthday party, you called your husband a mediocre failure in front of your mutual friends. Is that consistent with trying to help his self-confidence? Sabrina's composure finally cracked. I was angry. He was making a scene, embarrassing me in front of everyone. I said things I didn't mean. But you did mean them, didn't you? You do think your husband is mediocre. You do think he's a failure. That's why you went along with your father's cruel prank. The deposition transcript made for devastating reading. Sabrina had essentially admitted that she and her family viewed me as inadequate and had conspired to humiliate me as some twisted form of therapy. Armed with this evidence, Jim negotiated a settlement that was far more favorable than anyone had expected. I kept the house, my business, and most of my retirement savings. Sabrina got her car, her personal belongings, and a modest cash settlement that would help her get established in her own place. More importantly, the settlement included a non-disparagement clause that prevented either of us from publicly discussing the details of our marriage or divorce. Sabrina's family would have to find new targets for their character-building exercises. The final hearing was scheduled for a rainy Tuesday morning in October, exactly 1 year after the gas station incident that had started everything. Sabrina sat with her attorney at one table while I sat with Jim at another, both of us avoiding eye contact as the judge reviewed our settlement agreement. This appears to be a fair and equitable division of assets, Judge Morrison said after several minutes of reading. Are both parties satisfied with these terms? Yes, Your Honor, Jim replied. Yes, Your Honor, Patricia Whitmore echoed. Very well. I hereby grant the divorce and approve the settlement as written. You're both free to remarry and move forward with your lives. And just like that, 8 years of marriage were officially over. Outside the courthouse, Sabrina waited by her car as if she wanted to say something. I walked over, curious despite myself about what final words she might offer. I'm sorry it ended like this, she said quietly. Are you? Or are you sorry you got caught showing your true feelings? She looked away, unable to meet my eyes. I did love you, Tom. I still do in my own way. I know you do, but love without respect isn't enough, and you stopped respecting me a long time ago. Maybe we both made mistakes. Maybe, but only one of us was willing to admit it. I walked to my truck without looking back, leaving Sabrina standing in the courthouse parking lot with her expensive attorney and her Pyrrhic victory. The drive home took me past the gas station where this whole story had begun. On impulse, I pulled in and bought a cup of coffee from the same elderly clerk who'd helped me find a taxi that day. "You're the fellow whose family left him here last year," he said, recognizing me immediately. "That's me. How's business?" "Can't complain. You get everything sorted out with those people?" "You could say that." He studied my face with the wisdom of someone who'd seen a lot of human drama play out in gas station parking lots. Sometimes the worst thing that happens to you turns out to be the best thing that could have happened to you. "You might be right about that." I drove home to my empty house, which no longer felt empty. It felt peaceful. It felt like mine. That evening, Pete came over with a bottle of whiskey and a deck of cards. "Figured you might want some company on your first night as a free man." "Thanks. I appreciate it." We played poker until midnight, talking about work, sports, and everything except my divorce. As Pete was getting ready to leave, he paused at the front door. "You know what the best part about all this is?" "What's that?" "You never have to see Richard Blackwood again." I smiled, probably the first genuine smile I'd managed in months. "You're right. I never do." 6 months later, I was having dinner at a restaurant downtown when I spotted a familiar figure at a corner table. Richard Blackwood sat alone, nursing a scotch and staring at his phone with the defeated expression of a man whose world had gotten smaller. Our eyes met across the restaurant. He raised his glass in a mocking salute, just like he had the day he drove away with my wife. I raised my own glass in response, then turned back to my dinner companion, Jennifer Martinez, Dave's sister-in-law, who'd called me 3 weeks earlier to see if I wanted to grab coffee sometime. "Everything okay?" Jennifer asked. "Everything's perfect," I said, meaning it completely. Richard finished his drink and left the restaurant alone, walking out into the cold October night, while I sat in the warmth with a woman who thought I was worth her time and attention. Sometimes the worst storms clear the air and leave everything cleaner than it was before. Sometimes the people who abandon you do you the biggest favor of your life. Sometimes getting left at a gas station is exactly what you need to find your way home.